I want to ask you about this one quote. He was speaking in front of some Teamsters, and I want to read it perfectly so I don't misquote him. He said, "Negroes are not the only poor in the nation. There are nearly twice as many white poor as Negro, and therefore the struggle against poverty is not involved solely with color or racial discrimination, but with elementary economic justice." And I mean, this quote is so powerful, and it shows the problem, as MLK saw it, was not just a problem of racial equality, but it was economic equality as well. And I mean, if we're honest, saying this quote today might even be looked at as controversial, especially with the heavy, identity politics that we see in the movement today, and, the lack of solidarity between, Black workers and white workers that's kind of pushed onto people. So what, Quinn, is your take on what Martin Luther King meant by this quote? And is there a place for white people in the struggle for Black liberation?
Yeah, great question. I think Martin Luther King was just one of so many Black freedom leaders at the time who were really starting to put together that, racism hadn't fallen out of the sky. It arose as an ideology to justify specific economic aims. Of course, that first being the slave trade, and then evolving over time to suit the needs of mass incarceration, which we know is also hugely profitable. And so what it basically served to do is develop a superiority complex in white workers where they're unable to recognize their shared interests with Black workers, where a section of the white working class remains convinced that they have more in common with their white boss than with their Black coworker. So capitalism really thrived on this. And I think, it's no coincidence that MLK was giving this quote at a union meeting. I think labor is one of the major ways where we can rebuild that solidarity between Black and white workers. And you're absolutely right to say that, things are much different today. I think compared to MLK's day, the labor movement and the left more broadly is really beaten back and far from power compared to then. And so these ideas aren't as prevalent and can even be controversial, like you said. But I'm hoping that with time and through struggle, it'll become clear to people that all workers, including white workers, are indispensable actually in the fight for Black liberation, because it's tied to a broader fight against capitalism, which all workers benefit from. And I think that becomes clear when we have a program of Black liberation that's not so individualized and is instead about systemic change. Things like raising the minimum wage, which would vastly disproportionately benefit Black workers, or even things like defunding the police. Obviously that's critical for the everyday safety of Black people, but also anyone who's suffered a public mental health crisis, trans people who've had police interrogating their picket line, people who've had police, participating in their eviction process. All workers benefit from the defunding of the police. So I think, when we have that systemic program, that's another way that the solidarity can be rebuilt.